In this video, we're going to cover how to export your entire scene out of Maya and then import it into UE5 as exactly it was created in Maya, with all the collisions created inside UE5 and all the meshes brought in separately. This is a great option to use when you want to focus entirely on creating your environment in Maya, modeling everything to detail, UVing things, and then simply taking your entire scene out of Maya and not having to reconstruct it in UE5. So this way you just bring it in and light it using Unreal Engine 5. So I'm going to cover all the options you need to know, how to effectively do this, few downsides and solutions. So let's get into it. First, make sure, just like in the previous video in option 1, that you have your grid in Maya set up correctly to match Unreal Engine 5. So this way, everything you create in Maya translates to UE5 1:1 ratio. This is very important. So to use the Export All option, you simply go up to File and use Export All right here. This will take everything inside your scene and export it into an FBX file. So the single FBX file will contain all of the objects that are inside your Maya scene. So you don't have to select anything. You just simply go to File and Export All, and everything is exported. Now, if you have lights or cameras, that will also be exported within the FBX file. However, when you import it into UE5, those will not be imported. Only geometry gets imported and not cameras or lights using this method. But that's what we want: environment assets and props. So this is a great method to use if you are going to construct your entire scene inside Maya and you don't want to reconstruct it inside Unreal Engine 5. You simply work in Maya the entire time, then you export everything and then import it into UE5 and leave it as is, then drag it inside your scene, and your entire scene, entire geometry construction that you see in Maya is recreated in UE5. So it's great for large scenes and things you don't want to have to reconstruct in UE5. Again, great for people who are very Maya-centric and they just want to take things into UE5 to light. So I'm going to go through various options on how to make this process a lot easier and work for you. So let's go ahead and export this entire scene. So this entire scene has multiple objects, individual stairs, some are combined, but primarily it contains a lot of geometry. And most of it has not been combined, except for this largest section. I simply took this, duplicated, and then I combined it and moved it to the other side, so that way you get to see what it looks like when the objects are combined. So that way you get to see what this object will be when it's combined in Maya and then imported into UE5. So let's go ahead and export. I'm going to go to File, Export All, and I'm just going to click on Export All, not the options box. And the first thing you want to do is enable file of type that it is set to FBX export. And if you already exported, it should be. If not, just use this drop-down menu and choose FBX export. If you don't see FBX export in the drop-down menu, you will need to activate the plugin by going to Windows, Settings and Preferences, Plugin Manager, and search for FBX. And make sure you have FBX Maya enabled, loaded, and auto-loaded. So let me go ahead and go back up to File, Export All. Again, you don't have to make any selections. The entire scene will be exported. And just find a folder where you want to export it into. So I'm going to export it into this exported meshes folder, and I will name this scene _ export all. So that way we can experiment with it. Don't use any spaces. And if you need the separation, use underscore or a dash. Then click Export All. Now, before I do this, let's go through some of the options like we did in the previous video. The only thing that I'm going to enable or keep it enabled is smoothing groups. This will ensure to export hard and soft edges, the data that's contained within each mesh, and that you have smooth mesh enabled. This will always export the polygon version of the mesh. So if you happen to have smooth mesh preview enabled on the mesh, it will disregard that preview and it will always export the polygon version. And that's what we want. I am not going to triangulate inside Maya. I will let UE5 triangulate things for me. And everything else here is going to be the same. So once you've defined the name, location, let's go ahead and export all. In UE5, I created a basic level. Just went to File, New Level, and use the basic template. And I already have a folder created, so that way I can import things into. Anytime you import things into, especially when you import an entire scene, it's best to create your own folder so you can import your static meshes into to better organize your content browser. Otherwise, you will have a lot of static meshes that you will have to deal with. So to create a new folder, it's simple. Just select a folder where you want to create a subfolder in, and then just right click in the empty space right here, and then go to new folder and then rename it. So with this folder open, there are two ways you can import things into. Go to add and go all the way up and import to, and just navigate into the directory where you exported the FBX file. Or the option that I like to use is simply open up that folder, left click, hold and drag and drop it right into the content browser. When you do this, a menu will pop up for FBX import options. And here is where we have to go through and cover what you need to enable and disable. So a lot of these options are going to be the same as in the previous video in option 1 when you export selection. But let's cover some of these options again in this video so you don't have to reference that video if you don't want to. So the very first thing, let me actually reset everything to default. So make sure you have advanced panel open. This will give you a few options that we're going to go through. So enable or disable if you want to build nanites on your static meshes. And I do. Nanites work great with Lumen, and they they work off of each other. So your meshes are going to look better and perform better if you have nanites enabled. So I'm going to go ahead and enable this. Even if you have low poly meshes, it's recommended that you enable nanites on them. So not only high res meshes need to have nanites enabled. If you're going to use Lumen, enable nanites. Then generate missing collisions. I do want to generate missing collisions because I don't have any collisions. If your environment is not a playable environment, you may go ahead and just disable this. Keep it enabled means that it will take each individual single mesh if you keep it separate, and it will apply a collision onto those meshes, which is great if you're going to create a playable environment. Then the rest we're going to keep at default. Generate light map UVs, I'm going to disable this. Since you are using Lumen lighting, it's dynamic lighting. Light map UVs are not needed. Light map UVs is a texture that contains light and shadow information for baked lighting. So if you're using baked lighting in your map and not dynamic lighting, not Lumen, then you need light maps. But if you're using dynamic lighting and Lumen, go ahead and disable this because light maps are not required for Lumen. They're not needed. So I'm going to disable that. The combined meshes, this is the important part. So because we are exporting the entire scene, I do not want to combine meshes. I'll show you what that looks like later. But essentially it takes all those individual pieces, the entire scene, and combines it as one single static mesh. And of course, that's not what we want. I want all those separate pieces to be their own separate individual static mesh. So I'm going to keep combined meshes disabled. Everything else will stay default from here on until when we get to material import method. So do you want to create a new material and let UE5 create one for you? And it will take a simple material, create a simple hookup to it, and apply that material to all the instances of static meshes. So you have something to work with and something to start. So I'll keep this on for now, but you can change this to do not create material. And if you choose not to create a material, you may want to also import textures, keep that disabled. Unless you've set up your own textures inside Maya and you may want to import them. Usually you don't import textures in this way because you tend to import textures manually yourself, and then you create the material yourself and then apply that material onto the static meshes. So if you do not create material, go ahead and disable import textures. Unless you've set that up before ahead of time in Maya and you know what you're doing. So in this case, in this first example, I am going to create a new material. And everything else will be kept the same. So let's go ahead and click import all. It will generate quite a few problems or errors here. Mainly due to the UVs. None of these meshes have UVs, so it will generate a few issues or a few errors. Once you fix your UVs and your UV objects, if you re-import these problems will be gone, these errors. So I'm going to ignore them because this is not a final scene. Now you can see that it brought in every single static mesh as a separate mesh. It even included the reference scale that I had inside the scene. So it essentially took everything from this Maya file and exported it into its FBX file and then imported everything into the content browser. So if I want to rearrange and recreate the scene very quickly to exactly how it was in Maya, I will simply select everything inside the scene, inside the content browser. And you can see it created the two materials right here. So I'm going to deselect them, hold Control and deselect Lambert 1 and 2. And I'll show you what those look like. And then simply left click, hold and drag all of those meshes into the scene. And then just take a look at your scene, and here we are. So it quickly recreated the scene exactly how we had it in Maya. And because it has separate individual meshes, it created correct or mainly correct collisions. So I can go ahead and spawn, and if I run around, all the meshes will have pretty accurate collisions. I may still have to tweak a few things here and there depending on the complexity of the mesh, but it recreated the entire scene very nicely, and it has collisions for playable environment. Now, this is a great option to use if, again, like I said, if you do not want to reconstruct this environment inside UE5 from Maya. You simply create your entire environment in Maya and then import it into UE5 in order to light it, in order to texture it, create materials for it, but you don't want to have to reconstruct it by exporting each individual static mesh as a modular piece and having to basically recreate this entire scene again in UE5. But this is not a great method if you want to expand on this scene, and I'll tell you why. So every single one of these static meshes has been brought in, but you can see the pivot point is in the world origin. So if I wanted to take this column, you can see that this column, the pivot point is not in an ideal place. So it makes it very difficult to reconstruct or expand on this environment. So every single one of these static meshes, the pivot point is in the world origin, just like it would be when it's exported. You know, the pivot point gets automatically moved to the world origin on export. So this is why the mesh is over here, but the pivot point is right there, and the world origin in Maya is right here. So this is not an ideal method for modular geometry or for scenes you want to expand on. Let me open up one of these static meshes. I'm going to hit Control B on this sphere. Let me open that up, static mesh editor, and then here, and this is going to apply for every single one of the instances of static meshes. You can take a look at under Show, Simple Collision. This is the collision that it automatically created for the sphere. And every single one of these meshes has a collision because we generated on import. So you can change this, you can actually delete this collision, or you can recreate one yourself if you know how. This is a topic for another video, but so you're aware that everything will have its own collision. And if you ever need to disable or re-enable nanite support for any of these static meshes, you have this option right here, enable support for nanites. Another downside is every single one of these meshes, so like these columns, they were brought in as a separate static mesh. So that means any repeated geometry is its own static mesh, not an instance of a static mesh. So as you know, when you create modular pieces and it's a repeated element such as a pillar or a wall, it's best to create one and then duplicate that one over and over again. This reduces the performance hit and the memory of that static mesh. However, when you export all, every single one of these is its individual static mesh, even though they are exactly the same. So here's one. So here's the second one. So it's not very performance friendly. And if you wanted to replace them, you would have to delete them and then just take this one and replace for all the other ones. So that way you have only one of these static meshes inside the content browser, but it gets duplicated inside the level. Another thing for some of these static meshes, they are brought in as individual meshes, such as these stairs, and it gets auto-populated inside the content browser. And so this is not, again, not very effective. So what you could do is you can combine them in Maya and then re-export all, and it will be imported as one static mesh, one stair static mesh instead of individual steps, just like I did for this mesh right here. So let me go ahead and I'm going to undo so it gets removed from the level really quick. So let me hit Control Z. All right, and I will go ahead and select all these static meshes and I will remove them and delete them. Oh, before I do that, let me open up the Lambert material and show you what the UE5 did. So by default, here's the simple material that gets created and applied to all the static meshes. Very simple. It's a constant vector with a color change plugged into base color. And then this material is then assigned to each individual static mesh right here in its property, Lambert 1. So it just saves you a few steps, but usually you create a material yourself and you do this process manually. So I'm going to go ahead and select all of these and I'm going to hit delete and show you a few other options. So let me go ahead and just re-export the scene again. I'm not going to make any changes, but just go to File, Export All. I'm going to overwrite this existing file. And we haven't made any changes, but I just want to go through this option again. I'm not going to change anything here. I'm simply going to overwrite this it exported everything again. Inside UE5, I'm going to just drag this, left click hold and drag into this folder and import it. Now the only option I'm going to change and show you is I'm going to come down to advanced and I'm gonna choose combine meshes. So UE5 will take that entire scene, combine all the meshes, and that entire environment will become one static mesh. So let's go ahead and import all. It's going to give me the same problems, same errors. That's fine. There are no UVs. That's why we get these errors. I still generated material because I did not change that. And here's one static mesh instead of a bunch. So it combined all the static meshes from the FBX file into one static mesh. It also generated collisions. So this option is not very good because Lumen requires and works best with smaller size meshes. And it will have problem lighting this, and you will have a lot of artifacts if you have large scenes that are combined into one. So you want to avoid, if you are exporting all, you should disable combined meshes and bring them in as separate individual meshes. And maybe combine a few meshes in Maya, whichever ones you want to keep as one mesh, such as the stairs, which I'll show you next. Now the problems with collision, it has collisions, but the collisions are now not very accurate and they're applied to the entire mesh. So if I try to spawn, and actually let me spawn a different way. Going to right click, go to play from here. I won't be able to enter into this environment because if I open this up and then go to show and simple collisions, you can see the bounding box surrounds the entire environment. Now there is a way to overcome this. So ideally I could actually change the collisions to another type and have like more per poly collision. So I can still change it and be able to walk inside this environment by going to collisions right underneath here and changing the collision complexity from project default to use complex collision as simple. So this will use per poly collision as simple collision. Now this is not very performance friendly. It's actually very expensive to do that. So it's not recommended for playable environments. But let me show you. I'm going to enable use complex collision as simple. And then let me dock this. And then I'm simply going to respawn. And now I'll be able to walk through this environment. So it works pretty good. It's very accurate collisions, but like I said again, they're very expensive. So not something you want to do for playable environments, but if it's a standalone environment and your computer can handle it and you're not really concerned with the performance, you're just lighting the environment, or maybe you just want to do a walkthrough, then it will be fine. So generally you want to avoid importing everything as combined meshes. So let me go ahead and delete this from the level, and I'm going to delete this from the content browser. And it says I need to force delete something. So let me take a look. Yeah, I've deleted everything. So let me go ahead to go to file, new level. When you force delete things, that means there's a reference being held inside your level. And I don't see anything here. So I'm just simply going to file, new level, open new basic level again. No, I don't want to save anything. And now I should be able to delete these. It still says force delete. Generally, you wouldn't want to delete if you had references inside the level because you will have an empty container held inside your level, but there was no static mesh associated with it. And actually, the reason that's not deleting is because I have static mesh editor open. So let me go ahead and close that. And now, here we go. This is how you want to delete. This is a clean removal of static meshes and materials. So yes, I want to delete it. And let's do a few more options that you will need to know about. So if you wanted to combine certain meshes to be as one instead of separate meshes, let's go ahead and do this to the stairs. So let me go ahead and just do a quick selection of this, and then I'll deselect what I don't need. So I just have the stairs. So I'm going to combine the stairs so they're one single mesh. Combine. And maybe these stairs as well, so they're not individual meshes. So I can combine that as well. So you would just combine anything you want as a single mesh instead of separate meshes when we import. And everything else we're going to keep as it is. It's a good idea to select everything and go to edit, delete by type, and delete history on your objects. So that way you don't have any issues on export or import. And as far as in the previous video, I said you want to freeze transformations. For this scene, it does not matter if you freeze transformations with a pivot point because we're exporting the entire scene. The pivot point will always be moved in the world origin, regardless where the meshes are. So, but you do want to delete history to avoid any problems on export and import. Now let's go to File, Export All. I'm going to keep the same options as before, nothing gets changed here, and I'm going to overwrite this existing scene. And yes. Then I'm going to bring up that folder again, and left click, hold and drag, and import it to bring up the options menu. So here, the only thing I want to change now is I want to make sure I disable combine meshes, and I do not want to create materials. And I want to disable import textures. And everything else will stay the same. And let's hit import all. Again, we don't have any UVs, that's why we're getting this error. I'm gonna ignore it. And now you can see that we have a lot less meshes to deal with, and that's stair meshes. Now it's one individual mesh instead of separate steps. The collisions for this might be not perfect, but you can use the in-editor tools to fix the collisions here. Or maybe for this one, you would enable collisions to use complex as simple. Or you could also import your own custom collisions with these stairs from Maya into UE5. But that's the only downside. When you combine and you have a more complex mesh, the collisions are not perfect by default. So you'll have to work with the in-game tools to change it. Now, if I want to again place all of this inside the level, I can select everything and just drag it right into the level, and it will be recreated. And see, now we don't have any materials applied. It has the default grid applied onto it, the world grid. So this is what happens when you do not create material, but then you create your own material and apply it to the static meshes. If you happen to, let's say, drag not everything as once, but let's say you drag a few meshes here, and then maybe another mesh, and you essentially don't have the environment reconstructed, and you don't want to go through and delete everything. So what you can do is actually you can zero out the location to 0, 0, 0 on X, Y, and Z for every single mesh, and your environment will be recreated. So for example, if I select all of these meshes and then type in 0, the pivot point gets moved into the world origin, and the meshes get placed exactly where they were in Maya. So you can do this to every mesh that got moved or is not exactly where you would want it to be. Just go in here and type in 0, 0, 0, and your scene gets recreated. And you can do, and you will do this for every mesh. And if your mesh gets moved by accident and you don't know exactly where to place it, you don't want to place it manually, align it. Again, just type in location 0, 0, 0, and it will be placed exactly like it was in Maya. So that's a very useful little trick. So let me go ahead actually and just select all of these. And last thing, also very important, note the name of the meshes inside the content browser as well as in the outliner. So what gets assigned by default is the exported name, which was scene export all, and then the name of the object in Maya, which in this case specific object is pcube6. So if you don't name your objects in Maya, you will have the default name assigned to it. So inside Maya right here, you would rename the object name to whatever you want, and it will be added on to the scene name and then the object name for every single one of these meshes. So let's say I want to change this to stairs. The only problem is with this, that when you export, you would have to delete everything from UE5 in order to re-import, because Maya references the name of the object, and so does UE5. So the stairs, these new stairs will get imported, and the old ones are still going to be inside the content browser. So let's just do this for two objects. So I'll do this new sphere, for example, and stairs. So I'll just export this and show you. Let's do export all again. Options are going to be the same. Yes, I'm going to replace it. Let me go ahead and delete everything here from the level, not from content browser. And then I'm going to, what you can do is if the name of the object is the same, you can right click and re-import. And this will re-import from the FBX file, and if you did any updates. And now there's a problem. So it's a very tricky and delicate situation when you are exporting entire scenes, and if you are not keeping the names the same, then you're going to run into some problems. Then you may have to delete everything from the content browser and then re-import. So I'm going to quickly drag this file in again. So basically it's re-importing while I have meshes inside the content browser, so it'll keep some and then it'll replace others. The only thing that I am going to change here is nothing. I'm going to keep everything the same from the previous import. I'm going to import all. So now you can see that I have two sets of stairs. The one that we renamed and the previous one. So that's quite a problem. So you're gonna have to monitor this a lot, or you're gonna have to be very detailed in what you export, what you name, keeping the same names, or you just wait until the entire environment is completed inside Maya before you do any importing, or exporting all and then import it into UE5. So now I have two sets of stairs here overlapping. So just be careful using this, and you're gonna have to be very aware of what your meshes are named and what you are exporting. So this is a great option to use for those who love to build entirely in Maya. You want to UV your objects, you want to just deal with everything inside Maya, and then you just simply want to take this entire environment, export it into UE5 in order to light it, or even gameplay test, as long as you follow some of these techniques in order to export your entire scene and then import it into UE5. For those of you who are ready to take your skill set to the next level and learn the industry standard modeling software, I have an extensive tutorial course that will take you through how to begin using Maya as a complete beginner, how to model, and how to UV your assets and environment props. Then take a look at Maya Foundation, the home study course. And if you want to learn Unreal Engine 5 as a complete beginner, how to create environments, how to light them, and how to even use the modeling mode inside UE5, take a look at UE5 Fundamentals Volume 1.